downloading after the event, so feel free to download those as you wish. So as I mentioned, we have two outstanding panelists today. The first one is Chris Djerba. He is Threat Stack's head of engineering, and he's passionate about building not only a rock-solid high-performance product, but also a team of elite engineers, industry best practices, and a culture that attracts the best talent. Prior to Threat Stack, senior positions at Life Image, Enservio, Partners Healthcare Inc., Inflection Inc., and VIS Corporation, where he was responsible for the engineering, technical operations, and technology strategy for cloud platforms. We also have Jason Hand, who is a DevOps evangelist at VictorOps, organizer of DevOps Days Rockies, author of Chat Ops for Dummies, and co-host of the Community Pulse podcast about building community and technology. He spent the last 18 months presenting and building content on a number of DevOps topics, such as blameless postmortems, chat ops, and modern incident management. Jason enjoys talking to audiences large and small on a variety of technical and non-technical subjects. So welcome to you both. Thanks for joining today.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, happy to be here. It's going to be fun.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris and let you guys chat away.
Awesome. Thanks. So let me give you a quick overview of Threat Stack as we get started here. So, Threat Stack is the first cloud security platform that was really, built in the cloud for the cloud. And we focus a lot on having super deep visibility that allows you to obviously achieve the level of security you want when you're in the cloud or transitioning to the cloud and dealing with all the differences of that. But also, as you're focusing on compliance and operational efficiency, we've continued to design Threat Stack around these goals to make sure that it's a very efficient and useful platform for you as you're dealing with the challenges of security, giving you deep workload insights, allowing you to see a lot of your infrastructure, telling you where you're vulnerable, giving you really actionable and useful threat intel, and then allowing you to meet those compliance requirements. And so, for today's session, it's really valuable for me to participate because we've spent a lot of time thinking about alerts and how they work and alert fatigue in the context of security. And so really psyched to be with you today.
Yeah, and just a little bit about VictorOps. Our aim really is to make on-call suck less. And the way that we sort of approach doing that is to create a very collaborative environment for all of your on-call teams, whether that's part of your DevOps initiatives or you're still part of sort of modern IT teams. We want to make it so that all of the alerts and all of the context and all of the things that you were going to need as you were paged in the middle of the night or whatever the case may be, you've got all that with you so that you can not only get the detection of some sort of an anomaly quicker, but also resolve that problem quicker. And a lot of that comes from just being very collaborative and having this high focus on reducing the time it takes to repair and recover from an event. But then also, maybe more importantly, understanding what took place and trying to learn from that so that you can constantly improve. We have a very strong focus on this idea of continuous improvement, and that's something that VictorOps aims to provide all of our customers.
Awesome. Okay, so this is Chris. I'm gonna get us started. So, as a nerd child of the 80s, one of the events that really struck me was the Challenger incident that happened in 1986. And as a kid, I really wanted to read and know more about this and started to hear this term, normalization of deviance, and didn't really understand it until a bit later in life when I had the great pleasure of being on a speaking panel with astronaut Mike Mullane, who really went into this topic in his talk. And the upshot is that normalization of deviance is an incremental and gradual erosion of your normal procedures, and that it trends towards accepting errors as normal. And I think it's really relevant for us as we're talking about alerting and security and managing, all the things that you are in a very hyper-growth business or one that's transitioning, to the cloud maybe, and you're redefining a lot of processes. That if you're moving really quickly, which we all want to do, we all say we do, you have to keep this in check. You have to keep this mind of, are you normalizing the erroneous and bad behavior environment, but just kind of accepting it, right? And these are the things that led up to the Challenger disaster. You had people outlining where there were issues, but either for organizational or personal reasons, they wasn't able to get the attention, and there wasn't the empowerment to stop the process and say, we can't do this, right? It just seemed normal at the time. And so for me, it's been sort of an overarching theme as I think about the product we build and the teams that I've been fortunate enough to be part of, keeping a very keen eye on, are we normalizing deviance? And not trying to make it academic, but trying to make it very real. And you'll kind of see this sometimes maybe when you hire a new person onto your team, right? And they're getting exposed to all the things that are running. And you'll see, hey, is this alert normal? Oh yeah, that thing, that always alerts. Okay, so is this really normal? Is it not normal? And then this sets off a whole bunch of questions that will tee up through this webinar, again, related to this concept of normalization of deviance, but also at a maybe a more base level, it really gets into how you're functioning as a healthy, high-performing team who's able to really self-actualize their behaviors, because you don't want to have a lot of conversations like this. You don't want to say, oh yes, this alert, this thing that we've hooked up, we've put through our process, and that results in somebody getting notified is normal, right? Because all professionals watching the webinars here, we tend not to like to alert on success, right? We want to know when something's wrong, not like, oh yeah, that's normal. So, as we're going through the webinar, I think you'll see a lot of the things that we're going to talk about sort of, tie into this concept. And for me, there's a couple of always stories, right? There's like the challenger issue, but then there's also, as you think about your own organizations and how your teams are growing, it can be tough to understand where this happens, right? So I wanted to keep this slide not very graphic, but there's the old sort of kid's tale of sort of the frog in the water, right? And the water gradually starts to boil, and the frog doesn't kind of realize that it's boiling until it's too late. It's just kind of a nice warm bath, right? But at that point, everything's over for the frog. So no frogs were harmed in the making of this presentation. But again, if you don't take the time early on to understand if you have the right process and the right structures and the right signals, to understand if you're deviating or if you're normalizing this deviance, that water will just keep getting warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer under you. And eventually it's going to cause some big problems, right? It's like, just like as an engineering leader, we talk a lot about technical debt and what should we do and what do we have to take care of in any role that I've been in. And the worst is when you let it get so big that you have a balloon payment that you have to pay down. That's always kind of been there. And this water is always kind of boiling around, dealing with alerts, dealing with incidents and security, and understanding how to really focus that on what's important. It becomes really, really critical, right, as you start to, again, continue to go fast, and you see all of these things unfolding around you, right? And you're like, this is fine. We're growing really, really quickly. We're adding new features. We're adding new services in our architecture. We're integrating with more third-party platforms. All of these things are growing, right? I'm really fine with the fact that we're now pumping a ton of our app logs into our security platforms and other monitoring platforms. We've got now a whole bunch of health checks that are running in many, many different places, and we have to interpret those and understand what thresholds are being crossed. I've got stuff going on from third parties now that I have to pay attention to more, because my system, all of our systems, are an interconnected web of dependencies. Unless you're fortunate enough to run everything that controls your platform, you're doing that. You start ending up building monitors of monitors, right? So I want to aggregate all these things about maybe security on my PCI compliant boxes, or infrastructure health checks on these tiers of my infrastructure. I want to roll those up so I can get maybe an aggregate measure and alerting. And then you're going to grow quickly, and so you get in more point solutions, right? All of a sudden, you don't realize that all of these things are happening around you. And again, if you're not sort of taking the time to process them and put some structure around it, you can quickly start to, again, normalize that deviance, get a tremendous amount of error conditions, alerts, that negative feedback loop that starts to become normal. And so from my perspective, right, you just really want to be able to pay attention to this. And I think Jason's content that we're going to get into in a moment really starts to set up those things that you need to look for. And for me, seeing his content was really helpful as I continue to look at normalization of deviance, from my own teams, and then how it manifests itself in our product, what we're asking our customers to do, because we don't want to be part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution. A number of years ago, I was fortunate enough to work in healthcare, designing systems that were used at sort of massive scale. And I ran across a study recently that a friend of mine participated in, and it just kind of drove home this point about, all these issues are not just in our tech world, right? Not just in our DevOps and infrastructure as a service world and our software as a service world, but a study done that said of an academic medical hospital or medical center, if you look at just the number of warnings that were and alerts that were triggered, and think about the impact that had on the staff, to me this was just such an eye-opening study that said 187 warnings per patient per day. As a clinician or a caregiver, how are you going to deal with that? And if you translate it into the world that a lot of us deal with, those who are using a lot of the services like Threat Stack and like VictorOps, you're kind of looking at the same type of statistic, and hopefully you've got some metrics in place, and you're using that feedback loop to say, is 187 warnings maybe per service, per thing, whatever for me? That's too much. That's not reasonable. Let's figure out what steps we need to take to help reduce this and sort of, again, reset and renormalize our baseline, because that's really, a lot about what it means to be a healthy team. So I think with that sort of overarching kind of concept, what I'd like to do next is Jason's going to start and take over and walk us through some more additional, specifics around this.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And your example on the healthcare thing, I think, is a perfect illustration of what we're talking about today, or at least a good way to look at it from a different angle. Just last week I was visiting my grandmother in the hospital, and just like what you were mentioning, I was experiencing the same thing. You see bells and alarms and stuff going off all the time, and for a lot of those nurses and people that are there, taking care of folks, that's all normal, and it kind of just becomes numb to them. And they, for an outsider to go in there and you see all this activity, and you hear these alarms and these different alerts going off, you feel like those alerts, they must be important, or they wouldn't be alerting at all. But just a lot of like what we're going to be talking about today, when that becomes the new normal, you do tend to tune it out, and that's just one of the problems. So anyway, I thought we'd start off by sort of defining what we mean when we say alert fatigue. And really, it's the exposure of a lot of alerts happening frequently, which causes us to sort of, like I said, become numb or desensitized to what possibly could be critical issues. And a lot of that is because, in some cases, the alert wasn't for something critical. But at any rate, when we start to see this high volume and frequency and high frequency of alerts, it can become a problem. And it's not just that we start tuning that out. So let's talk a little bit more about what this problem of alert fatigue can actually lead to. The first one, obviously, I think, is that once you start to realize that these alerts are going off all the time, and in many cases they're actually not a problem at all, the response time for you and your team will dramatically increase. So you start to have these situations where maybe for a while, you were able to respond to alerts, respond to problems pretty quickly, but over time that starts to drift a little bit, and you actually begin taking longer times to respond to critical issues because you've sort of just been trained that, oh, that happens all the time, that's no big deal, it's just something I need to go fix. It's anxious, you start to feel a little bit sort of just overwhelmed with a lot of stuff. Especially before they've come on as VictorOps customers, they feel very overwhelmed. Sometimes they're not really spreading the load with their on-call responsibilities, and as a result, they're not getting as much sleep as they need. We know that problems are going to happen in complex systems. We're going to have incidents. We're going to have outages. We're going to have security issues that come up. And those don't wait for office hours a lot of times. So we have to go out and deal with the alerts and deal with the alarms as they're happening. And that can really take a toll on our sleep habits, which of course will lead to other physical problems as well. Another thing that we start to see, sort of part of that sleep deprivation in a lot of cases, is that we'll start to have negative physical effects. We can have increased blood pressure. We can have all kinds of sort of cognitive and problems with headaches and just sort of pain in our head. There's all kinds of things that start to show up as negative physical effects, even just being sleepy in general around the office, that are a result of having too much or too many alerts coming in that we're not able to deal with effectively. And then another one that I actually enjoy talking about quite a bit, and I've given plenty of other lectures on, is the impact to our cognitive load. It is it's a very high cognitive load, we'll just say, for those who are on call to deal with things as they're happening, especially when you put in the constraints of time. A lot of us have SLAs out there, different service level agreements that we have with our customers or with different providers, and whenever we're dealing with an incident, whether that's a security problem or just some sort of infrastructure problem, it's a lot for on-call professionals to cognitively deal with. And when you've increased the alerts that are happening, and even if they're not necessarily ones you have to deal with, that's just more context switching and more for our brains to try to process in real time. And then when you add on all the other things that we've talked about with anxiety and sleep deprivation and all that, it just makes the whole situation a whole lot worse. And so, and then one more thing to sort of add as far as a kind of a result or a byproduct of too much alerting or dealing with alert fatigue is that eventually the individuals as well as the teams within your organization, they're going to become a little bit grumpy. They're going to have this sense of dissatisfaction with not only their job, but maybe their customers, the company. They're just going to start falling into this trap of, well, I just don't feel like dealing with it anymore. I've lost interest in trying to solve this problem. This thing is going off all the time. It's always seems to be my responsibility to sort of deal with this type of stuff. And you start to see overall satisfaction of your teams and your individuals start to slip towards the negative side. So those are kind of all of the, oh, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add in, I think these are, when you look at these effects, right, I think these are so important for either team members or leaders of teams to really be on the lookout for. And obviously, as we're all going through our day-to-days, it's sometimes hard to pull these out. But as you look at, some folks will obviously wear their, wear their emotions on their sleeves, whereas others will kind of keep it inward. But I think one trap that is easy to fall into, but you really want to make sure you're aware of is, again, when you're building a team of the world's best firefighters, right, versus folks who are, that's a great thing to use, but I feel like it's that card you only want to be able to use when you absolutely need it, versus being able to really be aware of these things and use them to drive back in, because to kind of sum up a lot of what Jason said, the health of your teams out there in dealing with alerts is so critical. And if alerts continue to become this just kind of, continual gnaw, this thing that's just barking at the back of your brain, it is the productivity and the team morale hits you take there are very, very hard to get back. And I think as leaders, it's so important for us to try and, you can't necessarily always avoid it, but you do have to take the time to be able to pull it in and just recognize it with your teams. And I think as much as we all want to say that we can have, employ all the best practices as we get started, we all kind of make mistakes. We all let things sometimes go a little bit too far. But I think pulling it back in and then having really open discussions around these points really is an important thing, because you can't let people feel helpless. And I think that's kind of what a bit underlies this, is if it's always going to happen, you sort of feel helpless, and then it does result in, that grumpy cat look with those weapons-grade eyes that you can get from your day.
Yeah, those are great points, Chris. And I think it kind of speaks to some of the stuff that we'll touch on in just a little bit, but this really is a continuous effort. This isn't sort of a project that you're one and done. You really do have to continuously go in there and revisit what's going on with your alerts and make sure that your teams and your individuals, they are feeling satisfied, they aren't feeling overwhelmed, they are getting enough sleep, they aren't kind of just dealing with anxiety and those types of things. It is something you have to check in constantly and make sure you're taking a pulse of what's going on and sort of address it continuously. And I think at this point, actually, we do have maybe a quick poll that we'd like to put out there to our audience. And so the question we have for you is, have you experienced alert fatigue? So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. If this is something that you've dealt with, I can tell you myself, I've certainly felt the strain of just too many alerts when I've been on call. So we'll take just another couple seconds here for everybody to input their answer, and then we'll take a look at the results. All right. So
wow.
Yeah, not too surprised, but
not surprising.
Yeah, it's something that we all deal with, and we know that it's a problem. So I don't know how many people we had put in their votes here, but you can see that 86% of everybody that's joined us, or at least put in their vote, has experienced alert fatigue. So I think that's telling, and that's obviously a big reason why Chris and I wanted to give this webinar today. Is it's a big deal. It's something that really impacts a lot of people. I think we've got another question. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not all that surprised, but it is it is something that we hope everybody can work on as they go through this.
Yeah.
So here's that second poll question right now.
Yeah, so for those of you who have had alert fatigue, do you think that this has had an impact on your own team's well-being and the productivity of your team as well? Let's hear your thoughts on that. I'll give you a couple more seconds to input that as well.
Hey guys, while we're waiting, I just want to remind the audience that we are taking questions at any time, so don't feel like you've got to wait until the end of the webcast to get your questions in.
Okay, here we've got our results. Wow. Another high one, and I guess probably Chris and I aren't too surprised, but it is a very telling result here that productivity is affected when you start to have alert fatigue start to creep in.
Yeah, I mean it's no surprise, right? I mean it's just going to be an erosion of so many kind of different things as you deal with this. And I think for those of you that are kind of dealing with this, A, I hope it can get better, and B, I hope you've got supportive management that you can start to drive some change around this, because I think to see that high a percentage on sort of both sides, right, that's the ticking time bomb, I think, of companies, especially ones that are growing, going fast, doing all the things. You can't ignore that that's taking it, because that productivity hit could be preventing your team from not just dealing with the next issue, but thinking of that next great piece of value that they want to deliver to customers in the app because their head's too clouded, or in the service that you're building. So critical to address that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's continue on. Jason, you want to pick it back up again?
Yeah, so I added this slide in here because I thought it was really important to at least touch on the subject of burnout. The one thing that's important to I guess point out about this situation is that it's very difficult for you individually to realize that you're nearing some sort of burnout situation. And so the reason why I wanted to point this out is that I'm hoping that everybody on this webinar, you take away a lot of good information from this, but don't just apply it to yourself. It's very difficult for you to feel like you are actually starting to burn out. It's much easier for you to notice that with others on your team. And so just keep that in mind as you start to think about this type of thing, that burnout is a very big deal. We don't want to see anybody burning out. There's all kinds of bad results that, from reaching that sort of state. But keep an eye on your teammates. Keep an eye on other people within your organization. If you start to notice that they are looking a little sleep deprived, or they're feeling anxious a lot, whatever the case may be, that's your cue to start having that conversation with those people and understand what's going on, And if alert fatigue has something to do with it, then that's that's your opportunity to start having that conversation. So that's all I wanted to say about that. Yeah, and so kind of just again pointing out that burnout is not something that's very easily noticeable within ourselves. I mean, we start to feel a little tired, we start to feel a little bit just sort of over it in a lot of cases, but really the best way to spot burnout is to spot it in others. And so please keep that in mind as you take these ideas back to your teams, and hopefully we're all looking out for each other. We have a lot of empathy for everybody within our organization, regardless of what our roles and responsibilities are. And we don't want to see anybody start to have these symptoms or burnout whatsoever.
Yeah, and also just on that topic, sometimes as a team it's hard to talk about those things together. Sometimes you might even feel hard talking about it with maybe your manager. Folks sometimes want to put up a strong face, but honestly, from my perspective, and the thing that I've always appreciated is when someone on my team has come to me and just said, hey, look, I hope you've noticed this, but I've been not in a good place, and it's directly because of X, Y, or Z. And then, you really need to take the time to step back if you haven't been able to do that already, and kind of help them and make sure that it's a comfortable environment for folks to admit this. And then also for you, maybe as a leader of a team, to be able to get into the mindset of not only getting that person through, but in the back of your head now, you've just spun up a thread of, now I got to go really see if I can get down to a root cause of this. It might not be one, it might be a couple, but let's really make sure we're kind of diving in, because you don't want that kind of, you don't want the burnout to spread to other team members, and you don't also want that sense of sort of helplessness to extend to anybody else as well.
Yeah, good point. And one-on-ones are always good opportunities to have those conversations. If you're in a manager position, ask your team, ask your people that you're having these one-on-ones with, how are you feeling? Are you worn out? Are you tired? Is there anything I can do to help with this? And then on the flip side, if you're having a meeting with your manager, don't be afraid to speak up and say, I'm just feeling the burn right now. I'm feeling tired, feeling strung out. I've been on call a lot. We got alerts that are flapping all the time. You just need to be open and transparent with what's going on, and that's a big part of the DevOps principles, is that we share more about what's going on. We have complete transparency with the things that we're experiencing, and hopes that we can continuously improve the situation for everything within our teams and within our companies. So now that we've sort of I guess defined what alert fatigue is, and we've shown what sort of the symptoms that you may start to see once alert fatigue starts to creep in, we thought we'd offer up some suggestions on what you could be doing to hopefully, at least, if not completely avoid alert fatigue, at least deal with it ongoing and continuously. So let's go through what we've identified as our 8 tips to avoiding alert fatigue. The first one, this is probably one of the most important ones, and actually one of the more easier ones to kind of get going when you're starting to look at different ways to alert on anomalies and that kind of thing, is to make sure that when an alarm goes out, somebody's alerted, somebody's paged in the middle of the night, you want to make sure that that alert is actually actionable. There's nothing worse than being paged, regardless of the time of day or night, to something that you actually can't do anything about. And that can be either you're not empowered to take action and do something about it. Maybe you don't have the right context that you need to actually take action. You're sort of just feeling very, very much with your hands tied. You don't know what you could do or what you should do. But making sure that when you get alerted about something, that it's not just an alert for the sake of alerting. It's actually something that you can do something about. So making all your alerts actionable is our first suggestion on dealing with alert fatigue. And Chris, feel free to jump in if you've got any extra questions that you'd like to, or any other comments that you'd like to as I'm going through these.
You betcha.
Number 2, reducing redundant alerts. This is another part of sort of your continuous improvement plan, but you want to make sure that when you're getting alerts out, you're getting 100 alerts that really are all about the same thing. That's not going to make it very easy on your on-call professional or whoever might be dealing with these alerts. So make sure that you're going in, and if there are a lot of alerts that are really the same thing over and over and over again, whether that's just an alarm that's flapping or if there are a lot of things that are all kind of tied together, make sure you find some way to go in and actually kind of filter out the ones that are actually redundant. That's going to go a long way in actually helping you spot the ones that are important and the ones that are actionable. But when you get a lot of things coming in that are just all the same thing, it's really hard to spot what needs to be done.
Yeah. The other thing that I think along with that that's really important too is if you're in a situation where you're starting to deal with a whole bunch of alerts coming in and maybe it's a whole class of services, that if you can have a quick mechanism for silencing those so that you can already sort of mentally park, like I know these are an issue, I'm going to silence them now. I'm still interested in anything new happening, but you're able to tune the torrent as you're coming in. And then of course when you step back and the sort of maybe an incident is over, you can go back and apply that sort of tweaking because maybe there was a threshold, right, that would help reduce the redundancy, or it's an opportunity to look at maybe you've got a whole population of things that actually can be serviced in a different way through alerting so that you're not worrying about an individual thing, but you're more worried about a class of things together.
So that's a great point. Okay, our third suggestion or tip for alert fatigue is to isolate alerts to a single source or timeline. Now you hear the phrase or the term single source of truth a lot of times, and of course we refer to, within VictorOps, within our platform, we refer to our little single source of truth as our timeline, but this can also just be referring to something like a group chat tool like Slack or HipChat. But regardless of where it is, you need to make sure that you're getting all of those alerts into one place so that you have that single source of truth, you have that one area where all of your alerts are going. A lot of us are still in the practice of sending alerts to our inboxes, which, to be perfectly honest, is the worst possible place to send alerts, not only because those can be spread out amongst a lot of different inboxes, and of course if you have more than one person who's on call, nobody really knows who's supposed to be dealing with those alerts because they're just sort of going in a lot of different places. And then if your inbox looks anything like mine, sometimes those alerts are going to be hard to spot, no matter what kind of filters you put in place, especially if you've got a lot of alerts that are firing off in succession. Having to try to deal with those within the context of an inbox or email is just not a great place. So our third suggestion is to either isolate those into a timeline of some sort, whether that's your group chat. Those of you who are VictorOps customers, you know what our timeline looks like. You know that everything's coming in from all of your different monitoring sources. You see all the conversations, all the context. You want all of that in one place so that you can diagnose, triage, and investigate what's going on, and then start taking action without having to jump back and forth from a lot of different places.
That's another great point, because I think again, as teams grow and maybe you've got a primary and a secondary who's on call and you're dealing with alerts, if you can funnel them into one place. At Threat Stack, we have our alerts from our platform, since we monitor Threat Stack with Threat Stack, for instance, all funnel into Slack. They go along with other alerts from our health checking platforms and others. Having that one place that's not email, because email is terrible, to do that now brings in the conversational part of it, but also allows you to triage so quickly and almost in real time and divide the work up much better. So if you've got that isolated down to a single source of truth or a timeline, you can really sort of divide and conquer much easier as well. And I think if you can't centralize that, then you can't also, it's hard to make good decisions because you're dealing with too many distributed points of actions, and you don't have that one place to look over, especially as you're in an incident. Then the second part is, after you're done, you can go back in time and replay and see what happened and use that as you do your postmortems. It's really important to have that in one place.
Yeah, that's a good point about the postmortems. I mean, when you have everything kind of flowing into one area, it makes it really easy, or at least a lot more easy, to build your postmortem report and start to discuss what is it that we can learn from this and how do we improve moving forward. If you have to spend half your day or several hours trying to scrape information from a dozen different locations, it's going to make that postmortem process very unpleasant, and you're probably just going to stop doing it, which we've learned here in the last several years that doing some sort of post-incident analysis is the best way to start building resilient systems and start improving the reliability of our systems and just continuously improve the service that we're providing, whether that's internal or external customers, regardless. Let's look at our fourth tip here. Oh, actually, I put in a little screenshot here so I can kind of show you, for those of you who aren't VictorOps customers, you can see what I'm talking about when I mention our timeline there. So you can see 3 different panes within the VictorOps screen here. The one right in the middle where you see one new timeline message, that's what we call our timeline, and you can see that we've got information coming in from different monitoring sources. We can also see who's being paged, the incidents that have been opened. You can see some chats in there. Over on the left, you can see who's on call and who's who's dealing with things in the moment. So having that one area for you to go look at this type of stuff is gonna help tremendously with the overwhelming, in some cases, volume of alerts. Number 4, adjust anomaly detection thresholds. This again is sort of part of your continuous improvement plans, or should be, is that you need to constantly go in and make some adjustments to your monitoring system. So whether that's monitoring infrastructure types of stuff, monitoring networking, monitoring security with Threat Stack, what you were monitoring last month may be different this month, or maybe what you were monitoring yesterday is going to be different today. And so don't make assumptions that once you've put in some thresholds and made some adjustments on your monitoring, that those are going to stay true forever. You really do need to go in and start making adjustments, not only the ones that are being noisy, but also just the ones that really aren't relevant to your infrastructure or relevant to your situation anymore. So constantly going in and making adjustments to your different monitoring providers and tools is going to help a lot. I've included a screen here. This is part of the reporting tools within VictorOps, and what we've got here is our incident frequency report. And the reason I included this is a great way for you to go in and say, hey, you know what, tell me what is the noisiest alerts that we're seeing all the time. And this is part of our demo environment here, but you can see at the very top that we've got this one host that is just very, very noisy. Within 1 week, we're seeing all kinds of alerts that are going off. And so this is a great way for you to go in, if you're a VictorOps customer, say, okay, this particular alarm, it is firing all the time. Do I need to make some adjustments with my monitoring system so that is actually only going to tell me when something really bad is happening? Or is this already a really bad problem that we're just, for whatever reason, not dealing with? Regardless to what the option, what your answer is there, we need to go in and we need to start taking some action on some of these really noisy alerts, so that not only are we a little bit more smart about what we're alerting on, but also we avoid that situation of alert fatigue. Our 5th tip is to ensure that the correct individuals and teams are alerted. There's sort of like being paged on something that you actually can't take action on. It's also a big problem when you are the one who knows how to deal with the problem, but you're not the one who's alerted to it. Or in contrast, if you are the person who's on call and you're given, you're given the pager and you've been alerted to a problem, but you're really not the right one to deal with that problem, that's just going to slow things down, and you're also going to get frustrated that you're not the one who knows how to deal with this type of problem, and so you start to become numb to those types of problems. So if you're maybe the security person and you're sending your threat stack information in through VictorOps, you want to make sure that you're the one, or at least the team that you're a part of, is the one who's getting those alerts. You don't want to send those alerts over to your database team or over to your networking team, because they're just going to have to track you down and get that information over to you so that you can help out as well. So making sure that whatever alerts are firing, those are actually going to the correct individuals or the correct teams. Number 6 is to customize your personal notifications or your paging policies. Everybody has different preferences on how they prefer to get notified. If you're using VictorOps, you've got the option of either being notified via push notification through our mobile app. You can get a phone call, you can get an SMS, you can get an email. And then beyond that, you can also say, well, if I'm unable to acknowledge that I'm going to look at this incident within 60 seconds or whatever the case is, I want that to roll over to my number 2. I want that to take off to somebody else, so that maybe I'm in the middle of something dealing with a different problem. I need to have somebody else who can take a look at this. So make sure that you're constantly going in there and you are updating the ways and the methods that you want to be notified about problems, as well as your teams. So making sure you spend some time adjusting the way you get notified is going to help with that alert fatigue as well. Number 7 is to provide context with the alerts. This is also very similar to making sure that the alerts are actually actionable. When I get paged and all the alert tells me is that there's a problem, that's really not enough for me to start digging in and understanding what the true problem is. And so if you can find a way to make sure that the alerts you receive contain a lot of good information, maybe like the next couple of steps that you would go look for, that's going to cut down on the time it takes to understand the problem and, of course, resolve the problem or repair the problem. But it also makes it so that when you are getting that alert, you don't start to build up this sense of frustration that you have no idea what you're supposed to do with this type of alert. So providing extra context within the alerts can go a long way. This is something VictorOps has had built into our platform for quite some time. You can make it so that the graphs that you would go look for, or the logs that you want to pull up, or some sort of notes, whatever it is, the next X number of steps that you would do manually after you've been paged, those can actually be provided with you in the page itself or in the alert, which goes a long way, especially if it's the middle of the night and you're being paged on something. You're laying there in bed with one eye open. If you can understand very quickly what the problem is because of the extra context, that's going to help tremendously.
It's a great point, and I think a couple things here. One of the things that we do at Threat Stack around this is, for ourselves, we've invested a lot in writing very detailed run books. So if you get paged, you'll also get instantly, depending on where you are, you'll get a link right to that run book that is tied right to that specific alert. So that way you can, if you do need to take action, you can really instantly kind of click on a link and get right to the thing that we've kind of matched up with that. And it also, that gives you just in and of itself a bunch of context that you might not have already. So you can say, okay, well, some of the context is, well, like, I know I can take an action, and if I just click here, I can see exactly what it is because the alert has told me which system it is, what the threshold is crossed, what the process is, all that other stuff. The other part to providing context with alerts is, as you think about what you can receive just in your, maybe like from a threat stack perspective, you're funneling your threat stack severity 1 alerts into VictorOps, you're often going to want to find a little more detail very quickly. And so, you may end up getting an alert on threat stack and VictorOps through VictorOps, coming back to our platform because you really want to know more. And aside from just seeing what are my Sev 1 and Sev 2, you can actually see, okay, quick, not only do I see exactly that I've got a user activity alert, so I automatically know that I'm getting alerted because some anomalous activity has been spotted. The second part is I can see what was run and who. But if I really want to dive deeper super quickly, I can, because sometimes I want to be able to see, again, within the context of that alert, what were the contributing events that led up to this, so I can get a profile of what was happening in the background, and again, provide some really, really deep context so I understand what action to take. So the more context I have, the better action I can take. And then finally, can you just give me, like, what the heck else out? So this example, what did this user do? Like, what else? So for the, when this alert went off, for almost the previous hour, they didn't do anything. So you know what? I'm probably going to want to look into this further because it truly is like anomalous. And now I know exactly who to go talk to, what to dive into, and what my next steps are to take. I think this kind of notion of context is something that, as we all extend our alert platforms, our monitoring platforms, that it's that sort of next level of integration we all want to get to, where we can, sort of regardless of where you land, want to have as much information as you can right there. And of course you want to look to your vendors like VictorOps and Threat Stack to do as much integration and provide as much as possible, but it also means that you've got to invest the time, just like you're tweaking and tuning your thresholds for alerting and what constitutes an anomaly and what's a Sev 1 or Sev 2 or Sev 3, integrating, like, and as a team agreeing what's the most important context we can have, and then making sure it's applying and flowing through your platforms.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. And then we've got our last tip here is really just something I've kind of tried to anyway, mention throughout all of these tips, is that you need to constantly come back and revisit and make adjustments to your alerts. And that's just part of our continuous improvement, which is something that, you know, DevOps principles is really sort of bringing to the limelight for a lot of companies, no matter what size you are, is that if we have this focus on continuously improving our processes, continuously improving our tools, adding more automation, starting to monitor smartly and look for different ways to detect issues and then provide context in real time so that you can deal with that. This isn't something that you just do and then you're done. This is an ongoing improvement sort of kata, if you're familiar with the Toyota kata, that all teams really need to focus on. This isn't something that you can just sort of you know, take you know, not too seriously and think you can go in and set things up and then you're good to go. So number 8 might be the most important tip, is that this is something you have to revisit and make continuous improvements to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the notion of continuous improvement and continued iteration, you know, isn't just the foundation of kind of DevOps, you know, but obviously with modern engineering practices, we're all trying to deliver the smallest unit of value as kind of quickly. And I think, you know, you have to look at this process that you're using around managing this stuff as a product in and of itself. Put the same care into it. And if you're not regularly adjusting and revisiting and looking at it from a higher altitude, you could be really missing those opportunities to make potentially some big leaps forward in how your teams and yourselves are dealing with, you know, managing alerting, and then driving that back into your approach for security incident management and making sure you're hitting upon all of the right steps and goals in that plan as you have those incidents. So again, you can go in with sort of the highest signal-to-noise ratio as possible when you need to. And again, all this stuff is hopefully you get more to the point through these tips and through our kind of background of when you need to do this, it should be as efficient as possible. And the only way it's going to be that way is if you invest the time now and you invest the time ongoing and you make it your own organizational priority to kind of do that. And if you don't have someone, you know, in your org who can lead this change, maybe it's you've got to step up and do it and help bring the team together around this. Because I think if it's a once-a-year type thing, you're going to go through that whole roller coaster of emotions and run through those, you know, negative effects that Jason talked about on your team earlier.
Yeah, great points. Thanks, Chris. So one other thing I think it's important to sort of mention here as we start to wrap up our webinar is that you may be wondering, well, this all sounds great, but who's responsible for making these decisions and you know, pruning our alerting and all that kind of stuff? And the answer is that it's up to you, really. You need to go in and decide what's your personal paging policy, what kind of context do I need or does my team need to see when they're alerted on this type of stuff. Now, of course, this, you know, I've got a little asterisk there because a lot of this has to do with the roles and responsibilities that you have. You know, of course, if you are sort of the network or the security expert within your team, you know, that's going to help decide what it is that you need to be alerted on. But don't wait for somebody else to make these decisions on what types of alerts you should be getting, what kind of frequency they should be. It's really up to you to go in there and make sure that you are building the right alerting mechanism and building the right context so that you can deal with these problems as they come up and not only just detect them quickly, but repair or resolve these issues quickly. So I thought it was important to sort of add that little sidebar in there that this is definitely a responsibility of each individual to sort of decide how they want to be notified.
And then I think, you know, as we sum up all the stuff we just kind of talked about, the questions are a bit rhetorical for you as the listeners to kind of take away and go back to your teams. You heard the tips and the symptoms and the background and thinking about the overarching context of sort of normalization of deviance is, you know, making sure you're asking some of the hard questions of each other, you know, whether you're dealing with security incidents, infrastructure, application, you know, really saying, look, is our signal-to-noise ratio for alerts, is this tuning owned by the entire team, or is this just one person? What is the right approach for us, and how do we, you know, drive ownership of this? is this, to Jason's point, part of your continuous improvement process? Can you demonstrably show that you've gotten better at this, or that your team feels better about it, or that you personally are able to do this? Do you feel that if the above two, you can answer those, are the teams empowered to make change happen, right? Can they go off and say, yep, we're going to pull the red cord on this, and we're going to make this better before we go on and do something else? Along with just notification, do you have those right escalation processes? Are they sane? If one person doesn't respond to an alert, does everybody in the team get woken up? What's the right thing? And making sure you're thinking about that. Who are your backstops? Who are the people who can back up the backuppers, be around and watch the watchers as well? And then making sure as part of your processes, whether you're building infrastructure, building applications, building a engineering infrastructure security team, that you're integrating the time to bring more data into the alerts and get that proper context so you can make a better decision and learn. Part of your postmortem should be, well, what else could we have known at the point of incident that would have helped us resolve this quicker, right? And so it might not necessarily always lead to a shorter mean time to resolution, but it may lead towards less people having to be up, so the overall impact on the team is lower. But it's important for you to drive that in. And so I think, building on the basis of some of these questions that you can look and ask yourself, we had a couple more polling questions that we wanted to throw out there as well, I think.
Yeah, let's pull those questions up. All right, so now that you've got a little bit more context and understanding of alert fatigue and the different suggestions that we've made, we're kind of curious to know, do you feel like you have your own alert management under control? So we'll give you a few seconds to give us a yes or no on that. And while folks are putting in their answers here, I want to real quick, even though we don't have the slides up, I wanted to touch base on one of the additional thoughts that Chris was just mentioning for everyone to sort of consider and think about. Is one of them in there was the concept of understanding all of the contributing factors. That I think is one of the more important things that a lot of teams need to consider, is that in complex systems, there's rarely going to be one single point or one single thing that failed, or one thing. We still say root cause analysis and let's find the root cause a lot, but really, to be perfectly honest, within these systems that we're building, they're so complex that there's rarely, if ever, going to be one single thing. It's not necessarily a domino cause and effect type of situation with our systems anymore. There's going to be a lot of stuff that contributed to all kinds of different things. And so when you go in and you revisit stuff, make sure you are thinking of it in sort of a holistic view, more of a systems thinking type of mindset, where you want to understand all of the different factors that may have contributed to a situation, whether that's a negative situation or a positive situation.
That's a great point. I think it's absolutely critical that many folks, again, especially those who are running up in the cloud as well, taking advantage of things like Amazon Web Services, are often bringing together multiple layers of services together to provide functionality for your customers. And it's so convenient to want to find the one thing that caused the problem. But as one who helps run a massively distributed system, it's usually not just one thing. And so part of understanding, you still have to do your postmortem and understand your root cause, what led to this, isn't just trying to find that one thing, but making sure you do have all that context and those right data points to stitch together to have that story which you can then unpack and then make change from. Because if you really think that you can go back to every incident and find just one thing, you're probably going to be disappointed. And I think applying the systems thinking mindset to it is really, really huge. And it looks like you folks have answered, and wow, again, so this kind of mirrors what we saw on the front from the first poll questions around, you don't feel like you have alert management under control. And so it sounds like there's folks on there who are probably experiencing some of the things that we talked about pretty acutely.
Yeah, and hopefully we've learned a lot about different ways we can deal with that, and certainly Threat Stack and VictorOps are happy to help with any sort of assessment you may need and looking into the services that we provide. But hopefully you'll start to see the value of dealing with alerts. And Chris, did we have one more question? I think maybe I can't remember. Or Charlene? Yeah, there we go.
Yep, there we go.
So we talked a lot about continuous improvement. We talked a little bit about the time to detect and the time to prepare, or sorry, time to repair. So I'd like to know for those of you out there still listening, does your company have any sense of importance on reducing the time it takes to detect an issue, and also, more importantly, reducing the time it takes to repair? So we'll give you a few seconds to input those questions or those answers. And the reason why we talk a lot about the mean time to detect and the mean time to repair is it kind of goes back to that comment I made earlier about complex systems and the fact that within complex systems, you're going to have outages. You're going to have incidents. Things are going to go wrong. That's just the reality of the situation. And so you really can't engineer failure out of your systems. The best you can do is be prepared and be able to understand that something is going wrong very quickly, and then have the right tools, the right context, the right people available to respond to that and repair from that quickly. That's the way all of these companies that we now refer to as unicorns, things like Netflix, Etsy, Amazon, all of those, they understand that failure is just part of it, and they've come up with really, really great ways to detect that stuff and repair from it quicker than anyone else, and that's why we talk so much about them and the methods that they've come up with. And a lot of what they've come up with is the stuff that we've been sharing with you today.
Right, and I think this becomes increasingly important as obviously it's shown here that 2/3 of the respondees say the company does put a high value on it. I think that time of detection is such an important one, especially when you think about security and making sure that you might not be able to resolve really, really, really quickly, but if you can detect as early as possible, you can see the tip of that fault happening. Whether again it's just security or maybe a scale point in your system. The more time, the earlier in the life cycle of that you can detect, and that you spent time tuning your detection method and your detection platforms, that gives you more time to repair, but also to maybe land on a repair that really isn't just a patch, but you've really addressed the problem. Because again, the worst part is when you're just firefighting and you've done that and you just come back to the point where you're treading water. So maybe the same thing's going to happen again 2 or 3 days later or next month. You want to be able to detect as early as possible and see those trends, and then really be able to put in not just patches, but really repairs. And it's a great point. And it's glad to see that the poll question at least shows that the organizations respect that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're getting pretty close to our hour here. Charlene, do we have any questions that maybe we can try to address really quickly?
Yeah, we have about a minute left, so we'll go ahead and blow through at least one, and know that if you did ask a question and it wasn't addressed here, we'll certainly follow up with you post-event to make sure that you get an answer to your question. This one is kind of an interesting question. Adita is asking, what is your opinion about AI, meaning artificial intelligence, and automation as a way to reduce redundant alerts and even action simple alerts?
Well, I'll jump in on this first, and then Chris, if you've got something to add, go ahead. Artificial intelligence obviously is something that we hear a lot about in the media and that kind of thing. I think it's something that we will continue to pay attention to, but it's not quite made its way into alerting and incident management just yet. Especially for, at least in our own opinion, when it comes down to dealing with incidents, dealing with these types of things. In many cases, there's so much nuance and there's so much context missing that you really do need some people, you need some eyeballs on the problem to take a look at what's going on. Not necessarily just to fix the problem, but also to understand what we can do to improve things moving forward. But with that said, I mean, even within VictorOps, we put in some very smart logic to help you start to address some of that stuff automatically. I wouldn't go as far as saying that it's AI necessarily, but you can put in some rules that will help you remediate and maybe even take care of some of the problems automatically before you even go out and page someone. So there's at least some sort of soft sense of artificial intelligence there, but really it's just sort of basic logic.
Agreed. I think over time, that capability will grow, and we've done something similar at Threat Stack where we've given you very easy tools and thresholds to set so that you can really reduce the number of redundant alerts if you're getting any, but also make sure that you're not missing those critical ones in that critical context.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you both for answering that question. And on that note, again, if you didn't get your question answered during the webcast, please know that we'll follow up with you post-event. For now, we are out of time. I would like to thank Chris Djerba and Jason Hand for joining me today. This was a great webinar, guys. Lots of great information, and I'm sure the audience appreciates the information today. So thanks to you both. Check out the DevOps.com website for upcoming webinars, and if you have any questions about this webinar or you have a question for either one of the panelists, feel free to get in touch with us and we'll make sure that you make the right connections. But for now, this is Charlene O'Hanlon, an editor at DevOps.com and today's moderator, and I'm signing off. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.